Thank you everyone for coming to today's webinar with ELA Pro Amanda Sloan. She is here to talk to us about designing for beauty and native gardens. Amanda has 28 years of experience on a wide variety of projects in landscape design, including native plant gardens, dog parks, accessible trails, school and playground gardens, rain gardens, and environmental design throughout New England. Her experience includes project design and management from conceptual design through bid documents, peer review, presentation, illustrations, and writing. She has lectured throughout New England on ecological landscape design topics, bringing her strong interest in the connections between people and nature to her work. Amanda is well-versed in the use of native plants and ecological approaches to design. ELA is proud to welcome Amanda Sloan today. She's a former ELA board member. So on behalf of ELA, I would like to welcome Amanda to the webinar today.
Welcome, everyone. Hello, I'm so glad to be here to share this interesting information with you. Look at that slide, that beautiful garden there on my first slide. That is an image that I just found on the web. I don't know where it is or who designed it, except that it is in Michigan somewhere. But beautiful native plant garden there, and it embodies a lot of the design principles that I want to talk with you about today. So I thought I would just put that at the beginning to inspire you a little bit. And that quote, it's important if you're going to plant native gardens that they be beautiful, because no one's going to be convinced of their value if they're not. And I think as designers, we all understand the truth in that, to help people to really appreciate a native, a landscape, a native place, a wild place, there needs to be something about it that really catches the eye and really touches your heart. And so a place that's enjoyable to look at, enjoyable to be in, and beautiful is a wonderful thing. And it would be really nice for more native plant gardens to have those qualities. And birds. Of course, without pollinators, we have no fruits, vegetables, grains, and flowers. Any vegetable or fruit has to be pollinated in order to grow. And although many plants are pollinated by wind and other methods like that, insect and bird pollinators are very important in bringing pollen from flower to flower and starting those little fruits and vegetables growing. Also, native plants, besides providing food for people and wildlife, they also create habitat, shade, shelter, home sites. They sequester carbon and water. So there's that important aspect also. If we use native plants in our landscapes, we don't have to water as much. We don't have to use fertilizer, I would say, at all, but much less fertilizer if you are going to use it. So it's much better for just for the ecosystem in general. And also, you know, to get down to this this idea of beauty. A native plant garden showcases our beautiful regional landscapes. So if you're using native plants that are very local to where you are, and you're using them to advantage, you can really show people what a beautiful landscape in your region looks like. So many native plant gardens are successful in supporting pollinators and providing habitat. Pretty much all you need to do is pop those plants in, and if they're in the right place, they're going to grow and they are going to provide these things for people and for pollinators and for animals. But we're designers and we recognize the value of aesthetics. So many of us paint pictures and build sculptures with the plants that we use in the garden. And as the quote at the beginning said, it's easier to convince the public of a garden's value when it's enjoyable to experience. And I use that phrase, enjoyable to experience, rather than beauty, because beauty does vary from culture to culture. I speak from my New England background when I talk about the kind of beauty I like, but um, different cultures have different standards for aesthetics, and I totally celebrate that. And I encourage you, wherever you are in the world, to use those values when you're trying to pull beauty into your garden. So, making a native plant garden aesthetically pleasing can be a challenge. Any of us who've tried it know that. Here's a beautiful, it's beautiful from the aspect of being able to support pollinators and animals and provide shelter. Aesthetically, though, I think we could improve a little bit. There are reasons why when we're working with native plants, it's very difficult. It's harder to design. So first of all, often working with native plants is something new for designers, and we're less familiar with how to care for the plants um, for the native plants than we are for the plants that we buy at the nursery that are maybe derived from other areas of the world. And an example of that is the top photo there. You see a native grass, an ornamental grass. I don't know which one it is. It could be panicum, possibly. This is a very common landscape practice, maintenance practice, is that these ornamental grasses are just given crew cuts in the fall to last through the winter. And actually, a native grass should be left intact, not cut, all through the winter, because it's got seed heads on it that provide sustenance for birds all through the winter, and it provides shelter, and there may be overwintering pupa, insect pupa, or cocoons, or even the insects themselves on the stems of those grasses. So you don't want to cut those. So to leave the stems on is a sustainable practice that just not a whole lot of people are familiar with yet. Good specimens of native plants may be difficult to find. Our nurseries, more and more of them are growing and selling native plants, but not a whole lot yet. And so sometimes it's just hard to find, good plants. Often the nurseries will propagate from seed, so they have small plants that need to grow a few more years before they're really good specimens. And it's just early on in the game to really find great specimens at most plant nurseries. And then also, when we do garden design, often we're doing precedent studies. So we're looking at what people have done in the past and not thinking about something new that we could do in the future. And so often we'll look at these old gardens, the Victorian bedded out garden, and think that, well, that's our goal. That's the aesthetic that we want to reach. But that does not present a very sustainable, pollinator friendly method. And then also, this is really big, plant selection issues. We're still a little early on, as I said, in understanding how to find and select native plants. So first of all, what is the definition of native? Do we mean native to our continent? Do we mean native to our country on that continent? So if I'm designing, here in Massachusetts, am I going to say, okay, it's going to be any plant that grows on the North American continent? Or is it going to be any plant that grows in the United States? Or maybe it's going to be any plant that grows on the eastern side of the Mississippi River? Or maybe any plant that grows on the East Coast? And you see where I'm going with this. It could be any plant that's native to Massachusetts, any plant that's native to my county in Massachusetts. And there are plenty of people nowadays who will really want to select only their local ecotypes. And that's only the genetic variety of a particular species that grows right near where the garden you're going to be planting is. So say you're planting a coneflower. You want to plant a coneflower that where the seed has been collected right near where that garden's going to be, not from somewhere in the Midwest. Another big question is, should we use straight species or hybrids and cultivars of native plants? One of my pet peeves is the pom-pom coneflowers that you see on the right there. The species coneflower is at the top, the purple coneflower. And breeders have sort of gone to town breeding all kinds of very interesting looking coneflowers, different colors, different shapes. But for a pollinator, plant like the ones at the bottom there, the red and yellow ones, is going to be very hard to navigate. A pollinator is not going to be able to find where the nectar is on that plant. So if you have a cultivar that's very different from the species, you really want to be careful about that. And we're going to talk about hybrids on the next slide. As we said before, a lot of times nurseries just don't have these plants. So what you can do when you go to a nursery, ask, could you make this available? Economic demand will reap a supply as far as that's concerned. Also, you want to ask, were the plants nursery propagated? There are places that are still gathering plants out in the wild, which is, really just not good. You could really decimate a population of plants if you're only wild gathering. So you want to find nurseries that have mastered the method of getting the wild seeds, but actually propagating them in the nursery. And then you also really want to know, were pesticides used, especially neonics? I'm sure everyone's heard that word before. There are a lot of our current pesticides that have neonics in them. And it's very up in the air right now whether the federal government is going to ban them. Many state governments have actually restricted neonics a lot. It's because they seem to affect honeybees in particular, but many other pollinators, even birds. They sicken them, they weaken them, and they affect their nerve systems. And I went to a wonderful local nursery recently, and I had chosen myself out a whole bunch of really nice native plants that I had on a big cart. When I went to the cash register, I said, by the way, could you just tell me if neonics might have been used on these plants? And the nice young woman at the cash register called down to the manager, and the answer was, you should assume that neonics have been used on all these plants. And I had to leave the cart at the register there. I couldn't buy them. So it is worth asking. You don't want to bring these pesticides into your gardens. With hybrids, this is something I just recently learned. With all my years of experience, I didn't know this. So the Stellar Series dogwoods, also known as Rutgers hybrid dogwoods, a while back, there was a problem with native dogwoods in the landscape. They were getting anthracnose. And so Rutgers University went ahead and bred some wonderful dogwoods, these Stellar Series dogwoods that were very resistant. And I know I spect these often in place of a native Cornus florida because they look like Cornus florida, and I just assumed that they had fruit on them. Dogwood berries, the red berries, are very important for birds in the wintertime, and they have a very good place in a native plant garden. Well, I just recently learned that the Stellar Series dogwoods are sterile. They don't grow any berries on them. So these are the kinds of little issues that you can sort of delve into. There are little mysteries out there sometimes that even experts don't know about, and it's good to know. So after we have done some delving and we know more about the plants we're using, we're going to try to take the next step up to kick things up a notch from just planting native plants to planting them in a way that people can really appreciate and admire and want to emulate. So once again, noting that I'm speaking as a New England designer, and I realize that aesthetics differ all around the world. But from my point of view, these are some of the design issues that I've come up against from clients. So a native plant garden can be perceived as messy looking to humans. And we'll look at why in a little while. In our New England natives, there is less variety of color in the blooms and foliage. New England natives tend to be yellow, purple, and white, and there's a good reason for that, but it means that you have to search more to bring in the other colors if you want to stick with natives. Also, the textures of native plants are often smaller and finer or different from some of the other more exotic plants that we like to use. You can have a question about how to use the larger, the woodies, the trees and the shrubs. Also, you want to think about if you created a habitat that pollinators will use. So how did you place your garden? How did you shape it? How densely did you plant it? All those sorts of things. So let's look at that first question first, that a native plant garden can seem messy. Why? Well, native plants are more likely not to have a super neat growth habit. So as designers, we are used to going to a nursery where a lot of cultivars are sold, and often they've been bred for, a neat mounded shape, not to have too much pruning, or a very particular shape, a cone shape or a rounded shape. But native plants aren't. Shaping like that is just not anything that they worry about. Often the native plants are spreaders. So they will spread out as much as they can, either through roots or seeds. And so some of them can actually be considered a little bit invasive. Many of the native plants for pollinators have masses of small flowers and leaves. And that's because pollinators like to bumble. If you imagine a bee on a goldenrod, they can pick up way more pollen by just bumbling all over that mass of little tiny flowers. It's more efficient for them. A native plant garden can be much better if it's planted much more closely than we are used to. We're all used to seeing the civic gardens in particular that have like acres of mulch and one plant every 3 feet. Well, a native plant garden wouldn't be very successful planted that way. We really need to pack things in like it was a meadow or something like that. But that can feel like a messier look than a very far apart spaced garden. And then that issue that we touched on lightly before, native host plants need to be left unpruned through the winter. So you just need to leave your garden brown and tan and kind of messy all through the winter until the spring. And what is messy anyway? It's a human value, but it really is nature's way. And if you imagine a meadow or a woods understory, an edge of the woods understory type pattern, those are the ones that are most attractive to wildlife and that are really most sustainable. So let's look at some solutions for these problems. The first one, pretty obvious, give it a neat edge. So you can use some hardscape in your native plant garden. Boulders, paths, fences, wall sections. And remember that stone and gravel provide the minerals that butterflies need for puddling before they breed, to get the minerals that they need for successful egg laying. So that's a good reason to have some gravel in your native plant garden. And you can just mix up the plants in the center and let them froth up a bit. This is a rain garden that I did, and I love to just place boulders around the edges of my gardens, not like a row of soldiers, but in clusters. It really adds some design and some rhythm and an edge. Here's how I place the boulders with that rain garden. And you can see they're just in little clusters or single shapes. I've chosen some pretty boulders that I really like and directed the person who's running the bobcat exactly how I want them placed. You can drive your landscape contractor crazy doing that, but it's important to make a nice garden. Here's another one. This is actually a rain garden with a experimental sedge lawn next to it that is encircled by those paving stones. That is an actual half circle there. It's measured out. And then there are boulders next to an herb garden in the front. And then behind is a rain garden that's planted mostly with natives. I think there's some daylilies in there, But you can see how just laying those pavers down organizes the view of the garden, and just gives it some rhythm, some shape, something a little pleasing to the eye. Here's another idea. You know, often we use a cobble strip when we redo driveways. Here's a garden in Maine, the end of the driveway. We did a very pretty cobble strip, and then we just planted natives all at the end. That's mostly, I think, hay-scented fern, and there are some shrubs in there, and on the side, I think, might be geranium, wild geranium. Or, especially for a garden in the city, perhaps you have some walls that are begging to enclose a kind of a little bit of a rambunctious native garden. Here's one. This is actually a memorial garden in near Providence, Rhode Island. And what we did was we got a local artist to paint the concrete walls so they're beautiful. And then we designed this native plant garden within that. And the walls, you know, they hold it in, they organize it, and then in the interior, we can have some fun with our placement and our river of gravel that kind of tumbles down the slope there. Here's a little close-up of that. You can see there's smooth hydrangea, which is native. There is Chamaecyparis nucatensis, the weeping Alaska cedar, native to the West Coast. And this is an East Coast garden, so we made that choice to put a West Coast native in this garden. And there are a whole bunch of lady ferns back here. What else is in there? Possibly some milkweed there. Here's another rain garden. This is a residential one at the bottom of a driveway where water was tumbling down, stormwater, and flooding the basement and the garage. And so what we did was we changed the grading and diverted the water off to the side and made a rain garden there. And we used some granite steps and some stone slabs to make steps, and encircled some of it with these boulder clusters. And here's a fence around a kind of crazy native plant garden, but you can see how it organizes the space. It's almost like wearing a hairband. If you have long hair, you know, it closes it a little bit and lets the hair fluff up however it wants to. So here's another solution to that messiness situation. You can place what I call sentinel plants to organize the space. And often these are your tall, slender, more evenly shaped plants. These two photos show arborvitae. It might be the variety emerald, which I find very, very useful. A lot of people hate arborvitae, but with these newer cultivars, I think that arborvitae is a very useful plant in the garden, and it is native. If you have deer around, you should use juniper instead of arborvitae because the deer will devastate your arborvitae. Here's another view, and here, this is not one of my gardens, but tall, slender poplars have been used. And then also it looks like, I don't know what those are. They might be, this might be a European garden, but anyway, a nice, tall, slender evergreen. And it just organizes the space. I did a little design study to kind of help you see how this works. So here is it's photoshopped, but it's a native plant garden, kind of messy and frizzy. And now we've just placed some arborvitaes in there. And not in a regular row or anything like that. You can see they've been sort of staggered, which if you're planting arborvitae, I much prefer staggering and clustering them, and even planting different sizes of them. So you have some tall ones and some slightly shorter ones, rather than doing a row of soldiers. And I think that may be one reason why arborvitae are not popular sometimes, is that they're planted wrong. They're planted like soldiers, and they do look really boring that way. But if you just play with them a little bit, they can really organize and beautify a space. And here I've put some boulders in the front. So once again, just some clustered boulders, and the one actually has a little bird bath carved into it. And so this just shows you how you can use placed objects or placed plants to really organize a space and just kick it up a notch aesthetically. Here are some other plants you can use. You can use tall grasses. I think on the left, that's panicum, probably Shenandoah, which is the one that has the red coloring to it, with a nice blue juniper. And on the right, it's like an Irish standing stone almost. It's a tall, upright stone, and it just starts to organize the garden. Here, I worked with Julie Meservey on the children's garden at Mass Horticultural Society in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And here's a use of these sentinel plants. Behind that smooth hydrangea are cattails. Who ever heard of planting cattails in a garden? But there they are. They are wonderful plants. Goldfinches and red-winged blackbirds love them, and they stand tall and straight, and they really just back up a little bit more of a messy front of a garden very, very well. Here's another solution to the messiness problem. Use your garden objects. This, once again, is the children's garden, and we placed a bunch of beautiful wooden garden objects that had been done by a place called Romancing the Woods in upstate New York. This is our butterfly bench, and it's got a round table in front of it. But you can see, and also it's been paved with Goshen stone. And you can see how having that central object there excuses the fact that the coreopsis all around are a little messy looking. You can place sculptures around in your garden as central objects. Beautiful pots or receptacles, or a wonderful trellis with a door in it that painted a wonderful color. Here's an example of a garden in Maine where we found natural ledge. And so we just exposed the ledge, and it's a natural object that we just planted our garden around. And it really, once again, it just organizes the garden enough, gives a focal object to look at, and it starts to feel less messy. Another solution, and this idea really comes from the work of Piet Oudolf, the Dutch designer, is to mass your native plants. So plant in sweeping masses. This is mayapple. It's right at the edge of a woods, but it's a huge planting of mayapple, and it all comes up at once, and it just gives a nice solid sweep of a look. It's at the top of a driveway. And here's another mass planting of hay-scented fern as a foundation planting among evergreens, taller evergreens. But it just, it's beautiful to walk past. When you walk up to the front door, the ferns sweep against your legs, and they smell beautiful. And it also just gives a sense of solidity to the garden. that problem of what to do in your winter gardens. Well, if you or your client really is quite fond of neatness, what you can do is bunch your stems. Here, the stems have been cut and bunched so that any living thing that's in there and the seed heads and all that are still there. But you don't have to cut them. You can just take some nice cord and just gather the stems together while they're still in the garden and wrap around. It can be a piece of the grass, or it can be something beautiful, um, a beautiful knitted band, or woven, or something like that. And here is an image that I found on Facebook, but I've actually done this. Um, Braid your bunches of grass and other plants that are clumping like this. It just adds some interest. And what I found was that you just have to get the grass before it gets really dry and stiff in the winter. But if you braid it probably in September, and it'll just stay there all winter like that. And it's super interesting and fun. So the issue of finding more colors than are available in with your local natives. You have to realize that pollinator eyesight and bloom colors are very closely related, and flowers that are pollinated by bees often have markings on them that humans can't see. They are beyond the color spectrum that they have. They're markings that are beyond the color spectrum that humans can see. Often they are nectar guides, so that it'll be a circle that a bee can see, but a human can't, around where the bee can find the nectar. Um, so here in New England, for instance, our local bees just can't see red. Um, and that's probably why we don't have a lot of red native plants here in New England, native blooms here in New England. I'm sure the colors differ from place to place around the world. Now, also, um, if you are looking for color and you buy a cultivar of a native that's been bred to a color extreme, like those coneflowers, I have found in my experience that those can be very weak plants, so they don't last, and often you need to use those like annuals instead of perennials. So it can be hard if you're trying to add color that way. It can be hard to sustain that from year to year. Think also about leaf color. If if you're buying a shrub that's been, say, a nine bark that's been bred for a very different leaf color than the native species, you may be bringing some trouble to your garden, because um, caterpillars and other insects can't camouflage on alternate color leaves like that. And those leaves might be chemically a problem when they're eaten by caterpillars. I know there are a bunch of caterpillars that eat nine bark. Nine bark is the host for them, but the red and orange nine barks that they're breeding these days are probably a problem. So what can you do? Well, but birds love red and orange, and so you can open up your choice, your plant choices, to think about attracting a wider variety of pollinators than just bees or just butterflies. Here's that wonderful Monarda bee balm, Jacob Klein. It's red, gorgeous. And next to it is a penstemon with red leaves. I have not looked into whether those red leaves are a problem for caterpillars, and I probably should. You also can use red hibiscus or swamp mallow. Um, you can bring those in. That's a more southern plant, but it works very well in New England. You've got cardinal flower on the right there, um, which attracts some butterflies. You can see there is a, I don't know if that's a black swallowtail maybe on that cardinal flower to the bottom. And I think once again on the top there, that's either cardinal flower or it's Jacob Klein bee balm. You can bring in your oranges with butterfly weed. On the right, that's a milkweed. It is native, not butterfly bush, that's butterfly weed. And butterflies love that. Bees can't really see it, but butterflies love it. That's Gaillardia, a more of a prairie plant on the bottom left. Um, Once again, the red and the yellow um, visually combine to create a sort of an orange look to that. And on the top left there, those little girls are watering a rain garden with some sedum in it and lots of yarrow. And there's some rudbeckia in there also. All native plants that add a splash of color. And thinking about leaf color, well, a lot of the native plants do turn gorgeous oranges, reds, and yellows in the fall. This is inkberry at the back, and in the front, that is either fothergilla or spirea, but you can see what a gorgeous orange that is. And so if you can wait a few months through the summer, you can bring in plants that have a gorgeous fall color. Another thing you can do is think a little bit more about the specific colors that you're using. Often if you restrict your design to just, you know, a very small range of colors, especially if these are colors that your client loves or maybe that your client's house is painted. Here you have a house with blue shutters, and so um, the color design for the garden is white and cream, pink, a little touch of blue and violet. And actually those blue flowers there are balloon flowers, which are not native, but they're surrounded by garden phlox, which is a native. Joe Pye weed, that shrub in the front is clethra or summer sweet. And there's a lot of milkweed in there too. And it just gives a more cohesive look to the garden when you restrict your color range that way. You can introduce some of the missing colors just using your garden ornaments. I love this photo by Nancy Ondra. And the only thing I would say is that I would have chosen a different grass because that grass is miscanthus, which is not native, and some of them are invasive. I would have chosen another, possibly one of the very tall panicums for that, or some of the big blue stem, something like that. But I love those purples and blues that the benches and the garden container bring to the garden there. Once again, so try not to go for those really, really wild cultivars that are just so different from the species, even if they have a good color that you're looking to introduce. If you can try to find that color in a native, in a straight species native, that's a much better solution. And texture in the garden. You know, we all think about that as designers, and you know, here are some examples of New England natives that just have that very fine texture. You've got coral bells, goldenrod, and even the very fine texture of bearberry leaves. And you know, this all has to do with the climate and the latitude of the place where you're at. The temperature extremes, how long and short the winters and summers are. On the right, that's a photo of trees in Oregon. And you know, if you've been to the Pacific Northwest, you know the trees are twice as big as they are on the East Coast. And it's because of the climate there. it's basically a, a, a temperate rainforest, I guess is what you would call it. And the trees have much longer to grow, and the weather is damper, or at least until recently it has been. So it gives the plants a much better chance to achieve some height and some size. So what are some ways that you can add more texture variety into your native plant gardens? Well, you can mix up um, all different kinds of, um, of plants, trees, ferns, grasses, and your perennials and your ground covers. Um, you know, even while massing great numbers of plants, you can stick those masses next to each other so that you see a lot of contrast between height and color. Same idea. You want to pair plants or group plants that have a lot of contrast. So once again, that beautiful panicum with the juniper on the top left there, very different colors, very different shapes. A grass with an evergreen, and maybe something with a touch of red, like a red twig dogwood or a winterberry. That's always a great combination. And on the right, rhododendrons. They have big, shiny, almost tropical looking leaves with ferns, which contrast so much in the shade of green and the texture. It's a great combination. Here are some other, oh, well, on the left there you see rhododendron maximum, um, which is a wonderful native plant. And you can see those huge leaves that are all clustered around that beautiful rosette bloom. And on the right, you've got swamp hibiscus, or I think it's Malva something. Anyway, these grow naturally in many of our wetlands, and they are statuesque. And I actually have some of these growing in my own garden that a friend gave me. He had some in his garden. And the blooms are huge, the leaves are huge. They're wonderful. Big difference from a goldenrod. Milkweed. I always advise people to grow common milkweed in your garden. It's wonderful. The leaves are so huge and the stem is so chunky, and it really looks almost tropical. The blooms smell as sweet as honey. If you walk past a garden where common milkweed is growing, you will smell that wonderful smell. And of course, this is the host plant for the monarch butterfly. And on the right, you see behind the milkweeds is Joe Pyeweed, very architectural, statuesque plant. Once again, a great supporter of different pollinators. And oak leaf hydrangea, that's one of my favorites. To me, this really looks tropical. It's got giant leaves that have such an interesting shape, and they will often start to turn a wonderful wine red color in the fall. Another great plant to try to pull in for a little mix up of textures in your garden. Okay, so we're almost near the end here. If you have any questions, go ahead and send them to Mads. That is her email address there. You can just send them along, and she's going to pick out a few for the end of the show. So using trees and shrubs. Sometimes you can, if you're doing a native garden, you can feel a little bit of trepidation about doing this. Why? First of all, they're more expensive. They're harder to plant. A good sized tree is going to take quite a bit of selecting at the nursery, sending a good sized truck out to pick it up, care with the root ball, keeping it watered until it's planted, and then planting it properly. And sometimes it's just hard to know how to use them in a garden. So one of the really good stories about cultivars these days is that actually a lot of work has been done on native shrubs to make them fit our gardens better. So we do now have a whole lot of dwarf varieties of native shrubs that really have not lost any of their pollinator supporting characteristics. So on the top left, there you see clethra. There are a whole bunch of little mini clethras these days. There's 16 candles and hummingbird. The flowers are the same. They have that wonderful fragrance, and they are very attractive to pollinators the same way a large clethra is, but it fits in a small garden. And on the top in the middle there, you see Pyrus floribunda. That is our native Pyrus, um, as opposed to Pyrus japonica, the Japanese Andromeda. And Pyrus floribunda is a taller but much more slender shrub than the usual Pyrus japonica that we use, and it fits in narrow, tall spaces much better. That's one to consider. There's, once again, the weeping Alaska cedar, which is tall and slender, very slow growing. And my favorite arborvitae, emerald there, she usually stays very small and shoots up these lovely little turrets that are just so picturesque in a garden. On the bottom, we've got smooth hydrangea. There are a bunch of little ones that you can buy. And in the center there is a relatively new one. It's lowscape mound aronia, our chokeberry that has been bred to be just a little shrub, but it still has the same flowers and the same fruit as the tall aronias. And I've been using these. They're very, very useful. And they turn a beautiful orange in the fall. And on the left there is Calicanthus, um, or sweet shrub, I think that's is the common name of that. It spreads a bit, it stays pretty low, and it's a wonderful plant to use at the edge of a woodland. If you have a lawn and a woodland adjacent to each other, if you throw in a few of those, they'll stay low and make a lovely transition. You can just use fewer trees, and I find if you can only do a few trees, to plant them nicely and just use a bunch of ground cover with them, you leave that big contrast in there visually, which is really nice, the tall trees and the low ground cover. That works really well, you know, even if you only have one tree, 1 to 3 trees that you can afford and fit. So here's, to me, the most important design issue, and it's not an aesthetic one. Did I create a habitat that pollinators will use? It's interesting, when I've given this presentation before, the question always comes back, why did you show rugosa roses at the end? Well, these are not rugosa roses. These are our native Rosa virginiana, or Virginia rose. And you can also use Rosa caroliniana, or Carolina, actually it's sometimes called, or Rosa palustris, which is the swamp rose. They all look quite similar. They're all native, and they just bloom all summer long and attract so many pollinators. Ask yourself, have I created a mulch garden or a plant garden? Well, it's a mulch garden, unfortunately. For a native plant garden, you really need to try to plant closer together. And we'll look at another slide of that a little bit later on. Once again, did you really try to buy your species plants rather than popular cultivars that all the nurseries are pushing, but you have to try to, it's like Twinkies. You have to reject it. You have to say, no, I can't do that. Um, and a last one is another pet peeve of mine. Did I use any non-natives? And it's okay to use non-natives, a few, but did I use some that are really detrimental? Butterfly bush is not a pollinator plant in the US. It's a European plant. Here, it's very invasive. It is very attractive to pollinators, so much so that it can distract them from laying their eggs on the plant that their caterpillars need to eat. So I really advise my clients to rip out their butterfly bushes and use clethra, calycanthus, any of those wonderful native flowering shrubs instead. Here's that garden again, and you can see how closely it's been planted. Um, so if your neighbor across the street comes over and says, gee, that's beautiful, but you planted everything way too close together, you say, no, I didn't. This is a habitat. This is a beautiful garden, but this is also a habitat. And this is a place where a lot of important creatures are living. Go with the species and not cultivar. And if you can try to stick with 50% natives or really even more, that's a really great thing. I, as a landscape designer, have switched all my plant lists over to all natives. That doesn't mean that I don't have a few favorites that I'll pop in that are non-native. Um, let's see, the grass calamagrostis is such a useful one. Not native, but it doesn't spread. It's not invasive. Lavender is a non-native that I will often use also. But if you can really try to just switch over to the natives, that would be a really, really good thing for all of our pollinators. And the one with the red X is butterfly bush. Try not to use that if possible. So thank you. That's the end. Go to the Ecological Landscape Alliance website if you need more information. It's just a rich source of everything you need to know. And I'm just going to go through as the questions, if there are any questions, as they're being asked. I'll go through these slides that just tell you a little bit about the Ecological Landscape Alliance and invite you to become a member.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Amanda. That was a great educational series for us. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions that have come through. One that was sent before the webinar started was, what are your favorite aggressive ground covers for shade, especially for areas with erosion in shade or where we are replacing a failing fescue lawn?
Okay, well, there are a lot of ferns that would do fabulously well in shade. Hay-scented fern is a really good one that spreads very happily. Ostrich fern is another one that it's a taller fern. It also spreads very happily, and those can all be used in very dense shade, especially on a hill. They'll just hold things really well. They're not so good in a place where you want to walk on your ground cover. But if you can leave your ground cover unwalked on, those are really good. Let's see, what else? Tiarella or foam flower is a spreading ground cover that's really good for shade. There you can use some of the sedges, Pennsylvania sedge or Appalachian sedge, or I think it's called oak sedge, will all create, it almost looks like a little patch of lawn in the woods. It looks like grass, but it's a little longer than grass, and it will, you can actually cut it with a lawnmower. But if you just leave it, it looks like sort of long locks of hair that have sort of mounded along the ground. Very, very pretty, very fine, fine leaves on those. You can allow moss to grow. I'm a big fan of having moss in your garden. And it's a one of the high points of Japanese garden design is to have some moss areas. Those are just a few.
Very nice. Thank you so much. Another question that came through are some milkweeds invasive?
You know, our common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, will will happily fill a space. Its roots do spread and survive. Even if you cut the plant down, the root will send up another shoot the next year. Also, it's very plentiful with its seeds, those little gossamer parachute seeds that'll fly all over the place in the fall. However, I think it's easily manageable and it's such a desirable plant that you know, in the right place, it's enthusiastic, but we should have more milkweeds. And I seriously mean, you know, if you have a a native plant perennial garden that's closely enough planted, you can put milkweed in there and it will not take over the whole garden at all. So, and I don't know that any of the other milkweeds, the tropical milkweed, swamp milkweed, or butterfly weed are invasive at all.
And then I think we have time for another two questions. What are some of your favorite deer-resistant native plants?
Oh, yes. Well, so I guess I have to preface by saying that and we all know this, if deer are hungry enough, they will eat anything. But they tend to stay away from the very pungently flavored and fragranced plants and plants that have fuzz on them. So yeah, the yarrows are really good for, you know, a deer. They'll try not to eat yarrow if possible. You know, yarrow has that sort of bitter, kind of almost stinky uh, leaf smell to it. Um, let's see, what else? Oh, just trying to think of other things that are native. Well, any of the junipers, you know, once again, those have a very strong piney sort of flavor and smell. And you can get junipers in any size, you know, from the rug junipers to a tall, slender one. Um, that's good. And what else? You know, I would say any plant that sort of has that fuzziness to it. I think, let's see, native ginger. Deer have never eaten my native gingers. So that actually is another good ground cover for a shady area. If it likes it, it's going to really spread and it's beautiful.
Nice. Thank you.
Drawing a tad of a blank on that, but I think if you just look for plants that are, you know, when you bruise the leaf, it just really smells.
Mm,
Deer will not tend to eat that first.
cool. And then
Maybe
our
sweet
last,
fern,
oh,
maybe
sorry.
sweet fern is an inedible by deer. Does the deer eat sweet fern?
Oh, you know, you're talking about Comptonia
Yes,
peregrina.
Comptonia,
You
yeah.
know, that is a fabulous suggestion. Thank you. I have not known them to eat that at all. Great. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then the last question of today, since it is 3:05, what can we grow with common milkweed that will compete successfully since milkweed is assertive to say the least?
Yeah. Well, so what I've grown with it is other plants that are somewhat assertive also. Um, in that roadside garden that you saw in the show, there's garden phlox. So plants that are also tall and enthusiastic. that will sort of rub shoulders with milkweed and give it a little jostling every once in a while. Probably some of the rudbeckias would work well. So summer phlox, any of the taller rudbeckias, Joe Pye weeds. What else is tall that way? Oh, Gora, the wand flower, is good also. You want to give it some competition um, at its same size. Like it will pick on kids who are smaller than it and probably punch them out. So and if you want to achieve different heights in your garden, then maybe you just put your milkweed where those taller plants are. And I just, I don't even tend to pull out plants that I don't want in certain areas of my garden. I just take my pruners and clip them off at the bottom because I'm walking through my gardens every couple of weeks. So I just take care of them that way, and that way the roots will die after a while.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If our audience here has any more questions, Amanda, can they send them to you or myself so we can get an answer to them?
Yes, I think it would be great, Mads, if this works for you, for people to use that email address to send the questions to you, and then you and I will talk about how we can get an answer to as many of those questions as possible.
Awesome. Okay, I am putting my email in the chat right now. Please feel free to send any extra questions our way or my way, and I will make sure that Amanda sees them and we can get an answer response to you. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. I learned so much. I don't know about you guys. Please keep your eyes peeled for a follow-up evaluation in your inboxes, along with the link to the presentation recording so you can access it on demand. If you have any questions about ELA or how we can help develop you in this space, please feel free to reach out to myself or Peggy at ecolandscaping.org. I'm also putting that in the chat. And we are looking forward to hearing from you. I want to take the time to apologize. I know there was some confusion with the links towards the beginning of this webinar today. I'm so sorry for that. I hope I was able to respond to your emails in a timely manner, and we will be sure to make sure that you all have the recording at your earliest or at our earliest convenience. So keep your eyes peeled.
Bye, everyone.